Welcome to This Week's Okay at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, my colleague, Russell Berger, with attorneys at Kerman. And today we are talking about joint employment. When you're a business and you hire an employee, obviously we're a law firm. We hire a lot of lawyers. We hire a lawyer directly and they're our employee. That can be pretty straightforward. And it's pretty clear that person's our employee and we're employees of the law firm. But there are situations where who is employing someone might be a little less clear, where someone might have more than one employer that is responsible for them from a legal perspective. And this comes into play when we're looking at who's responsible to pay wages and who might have certain liabilities as it relates to other types of laws as well. So what are some things that people should be thinking about in the joint employer context, Russell, when this occurs, and what do people need to be considering in this context?
The main risk associated with joint employment is that you're on the hook for the employee's wages. Even though you might not be the on paper traditional employer, you still have those obligations, responsibilities in the wage context, exposure to multipliers on damages and fee shifting and all that. We see it probably most commonly in the context of joint employment within one ownership group, but with different companies. So, for example, somebody owns multiple different locations within the same general operation, but they're not tight in terms of who works for which entity. Sometimes you see that because people work 30 hours at location A, 30 hours at location B, and the lines get so blurred that both entities are really employers. And as a result, the person's worked 60 hours, 20 of which are overtime, but they don't get paid overtime because they're somewhat separate. So that's where we see some of that risk. Obviously, that's bad for other reasons too, from the business owner standpoint, because if you create different entities, best to silo them. There's ways to do labor sharing agreements. There's ways to make this more organized and cohesive and achieve your goals better, but it requires some thought and some planning. We also see joint employment in the context of contracting, franchising, staffing. When you hire somebody through a staffing company, who's the employer? From the standpoint of the employee who needs to get paid their wages, it could be both. So there's a lot of different situations where it can come up. And in those situations, you want to make sure that the employee is getting paid properly so the employee doesn't turn around and try to put you on the hook for it.
Yeah, one of the things as far as preparedness that you mentioned that can be really frustrating in the joint employer context is if you don't realize that the joint employment applies, you might end up with overtime obligations you didn't know you had because you didn't think they were working overtime, but you thought the entities were considered separate. Or in the second context that you just mentioned, maybe the one entity is really in control of the day to day or most of the things that are going on. And the second entity doesn't realize that they're also an employer. They don't have much say in what's going on. And then all of a sudden, they have this obligation they didn't realize they had, and they could have avoided it had they realized that they were also here. They may have gotten more involved in the terms of employment and what was going on a day-to-day basis. No one likes a surprise, right? In these circumstances, you'd rather do the analysis upon given a chance in any of the contexts that you're mentioning, whether it be government contracting, franchise, whether it be situation you described, multiple entities, maybe with similar ownership, all of those situations, any of that are triggering that there could be a joint employer situation, you're better off to be able to plan ahead of time how that's going to impact the business and how to offset some of that risk and liability than to all of a sudden realize that you're in that situation down the road when there is a wage and hour obligation, because that can be really costly.
The quick reminders, are you sharing employees? If somebody else is on paper, they're the employer, are their employees working in your business and vice versa? And if so, how are you allocating who's responsible for what? How are you ensuring that the other person does or the other business does what they're supposed to do? There are answers to all these questions. The important thing is to recognize and ask it early.
Yeah, very point. Well, thank you, Russell. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Sarah.